Jamie hadn't expected to return here, to the house filled with echoes of memories, warmth, and a fair bit of mystery. After years away at college, then struggling in the city to find their footing, they found themselves stepping back into the house where Rowan still lived, though now alone. Jamie's father had passed 2 years ago, and since then, Rowan had managed on their own in the sprawling old home on the outskirts of town. Now, as Jamie stood on the wide front steps, bags in hand, the door opened, and Rowan greeted them with a tentative smile. For a moment they both hesitated, as if unsure of the distance between them or how to navigate it. "Welcome home," Rowan said, stepping back to allow Jamie inside. The words hung in the air, carrying an unexpected weight. Jamie hadn't lived here long with Rowan before they'd been finishing school, visiting only on holidays, and had never truly bonded with their father's second spouse. "Thanks," Jamie replied, managing a small smile in return, but it felt forced. The silence between them stretched as Rowan picked up one of Jamie's bags and carried it upstairs to the guest room. Jamie followed, each creak of the old wood floors seeming to remind them of the years that had passed, the things that hadn't been said, and the uncomfortable air that now filled the space. Days passed, and the tension between them remained, each politely keeping to their routines. Jamie's job search, done from their laptop in the kitchen or living room, kept them somewhat occupied, but there was a gnawing feeling of being out of place, an unsettled sense of something left unsaid, something Jamie couldn't quite define. One evening, Rowan appeared in the doorway to the living room, wiping their hands on a towel after washing up. "I was thinking," they began, breaking Jamie's focus from the screen. "That attic is due for some sorting out. I've been meaning to go through it, but maybe if you're up for it, you could give me a hand." Jamie blinked, surprised by the suggestion. The attic had always been off limits, a place full of family relics, a blend of inherited belongings and Jamie's dad's cherished mementos. Rowan's invitation felt personal, almost invasive, yet something about it also held a strange allure. "Sure," Jamie said finally, feeling both curiosity and a slight apprehension. They climbed the narrow staircase leading up to the attic the following morning, each step creaking underfoot. Rowan opened the door at the top, and the scent of dust and aged wood filled their senses. A warm shaft of light from the small attic window illuminated boxes and covered furniture, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Together they started sorting through the boxes, each item a tangible connection to the past. They worked in relative silence, occasionally exchanging small smiles or remarks about the items they uncovered. Old photos, worn notebooks, a handful of faded letters. Rowan's hands moved with care as they lifted a photo frame. "I remember this day," Rowan murmured almost to themselves, holding up a picture of Jamie's dad at a lake, a wide grin on his face. He loved that place. Jamie glanced at Rowan, noting the faint sadness in their eyes. They hadn't talked much about their shared loss, both choosing to avoid the subject in different ways. But in the attic, surrounded by memories, it seemed harder to ignore. "He used to take me fishing there," Jamie said, a faint smile tugging at their lips as they looked at the photo. "He'd always catch the smallest fish and pretend it was the biggest one." Rowan chuckled, the sound soft and genuine. He had a knack for making the ordinary feel special. For a moment, Jamie saw Rowan differently, not just as their father's spouse, but as someone who had loved and lost just as deeply as they had. The moment passed quickly, though, and they returned to the quiet of sorting through boxes. But from then on, the silence between them felt a little less heavy, the air between them a little more open. As the days passed, they continued their work in the attic, unearthing more memories and sharing brief personal moments. Jamie found themselves lingering, not just because of the objects, but because of the conversations that blossomed in this small, secluded space. It was like discovering new sides of Rowan's stories they'd never heard, perspectives they'd never considered. One afternoon they found a small box tucked away in the corner, covered in dust. Rowan reached for it, their expression unreadable as they opened it. Inside lay a carefully folded letter, its edges worn and yellowed. Jamie watched as Rowan unfolded it, their hands trembling slightly. This was "Your father's letter to me," Rowan said, their voice barely a whisper. "He wrote it right before we got married. It's a lot." They hesitated, and Jamie felt a pang of empathy, sensing the depth of what Rowan was feeling. "You don't have to read it out loud," Jamie said softly, feeling as if they were intruding on a private moment. Rowan glanced at them, a grateful smile breaking through the sadness. "Thank you." A quiet understanding passed between them, and Rowan gently tucked the letter back into the box. For the first time, Jamie felt a true connection, a realization that Rowan, too, had a life filled with love, loss, and memories as heavy as their own. The attic had become more than a place for old belongings. It was now a space where they both came to process, to share, and to begin healing, even if they weren't quite ready to say it aloud. As they continued working, Jamie found themselves studying Rowan's gestures, the subtle expressions that crossed their face, the way their voice softened when they spoke of the past. It felt comforting, and a strange warmth grew in Jamie's chest, replacing the distance they'd kept for so long. There was something quietly binding about the shared silence, the shared memories. One evening, as they sat on an old trunk, sifting through photos, Rowan let out a small sigh. "I don't know why I've held on to so much of this," they said, looking around. "Maybe I was just afraid to let go." Jamie reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Rowan's arm. "You don't have to let go of everything. Some things are worth keeping." Rowan looked at Jamie, their eyes shining with gratitude, and for a long moment they sat there, the air thick with unspoken words. It was in that quiet, shared space that they found solace, both understanding the value of holding on and the courage it took to move forward. As the attic project stretched into weeks, Jamie and Rowan developed a rhythm. They moved through stacks of boxes, sorting photos, reading through old letters, and sharing stories that revealed pieces of themselves they'd kept buried. In this space of dust and memory, it felt as though each item they uncovered was part of an unspoken conversation, one that bridged the distance between them, that closed the gap left by Jamie's father. One afternoon they found an old family album. The spine was cracked, the pages brittle, but it was filled with photos Jamie had never seen before. There were pictures of their father from his youth, laughing with friends, standing beside cars Jamie didn't recognize. There were photos of him and Rowan at gatherings Jamie hadn't attended, small celebrations of quiet happiness. In these pictures, Jamie saw a side of their father that had always been hidden behind the daily routines of family life. Jamie lingered on one photo, a candid shot of their father looking at Rowan, the fondness in his gaze unmistakable. It struck Jamie in a way they hadn't expected, filling them with a bittersweet nostalgia. It was a reminder of how much Rowan had been a part of their father's life, how deeply their lives had intertwined. Rowan noticed Jamie's lingering gaze. "He loved those moments," Rowan murmured, glancing down at the photo with a soft smile. The small things, quiet dinners, walks in the park, things that never felt like much at the time, but looking back, they're the memories that mean the most. Jamie nodded, feeling a strange, unexpected warmth. "It's like he never wanted us to know how much he loved all the little things," they replied softly. "He was always so focused on making sure we had what we needed that I think he forgot to show us the rest." Rowan's expression softened, and they placed a gentle hand on Jamie's shoulder. "He loved you more than anything, Jamie. He talked about you all the time, proud of every little thing you did. I know he didn't always show it, but he felt it deeply." For a moment, Jamie felt an ache in their chest, the kind that only surfaces when old wounds are reopened with unexpected kindness. They looked at Rowan, seeing them now in a way they never had before. Rowan wasn't just a figure in their father's life, they were a part of the family Jamie had lost, someone who had shared in the love and the pain of his absence. As they continued sorting, Jamie began to notice the small details of Rowan's presence, the way their hands moved gently over each photo, the faint laugh lines around their eyes that deepened when they smiled. It was comforting, grounding, and Jamie found themselves gravitating toward Rowan in moments of quiet, feeling an ease they hadn't expected. They shared glances, smiles, even silences that felt fuller, as though words were unneeded. One evening, Jamie stumbled upon an old record player tucked in the corner. They dusted it off and found a stack of vinyl records beside it, each labeled in their father's neat handwriting. Rowan's face lit up when they saw it, and without hesitation they lifted a record from the pile and placed it on the player. The needle scratched, and a soft, crackling melody filled the attic, a tune Jamie faintly remembered from childhood. They sat on the floor together, Rowan's shoulder brushing against Jamie's as they listened. The music was a gentle lull, a soothing balm that wrapped around them. In the dim light of the attic, surrounded by relics of a shared past, the distance between them faded, replaced by a quiet companionship that felt as natural as breathing. As the song ended, Rowan turned to Jamie, their face softened by the golden light filtering through the attic window. "Thank you, Jamie," they said quietly, "for being here, for helping me with all of this." Jamie met Rowan's gaze, feeling a swell of emotion that was hard to name. I needed this too," Jamie replied, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how much until now." They fell into silence again, but it was a silence thick with understanding, with a feeling that transcended words. Jamie felt something shift inside them, a quiet, unfamiliar warmth that took root, impossible to ignore. It was more than just nostalgia or shared memories, it was a connection that felt tangible, something that existed between them alone. The days continued in this gentle rhythm, and Jamie found themselves looking forward to the afternoons spent in the attic. Rowan was no longer just a reminder of the past, but a steady presence, someone who understood Jamie's grief and shared their memories in a way that felt uniquely healing. Jamie found solace in the moments they shared, and slowly they began to open up about the struggles they'd been facing. One evening, as they were putting away some boxes, Jamie finally spoke, their voice filled with hesitation. I don't know who I am anymore. It's like I had this plan, this whole idea of what my life would be, and now it just feels like it all fell apart." Rowan listened intently, their gaze steady and compassionate. "I think we all feel like that sometimes," they replied softly. "Life has a way of taking our plans and shaking them up until we don't recognize them anymore. But that doesn't mean we're lost. Sometimes we just need a little time to find our footing again." Jamie looked at Rowan, feeling a surge of gratitude. "It's hard to explain, but being here, doing this with you, it feels like the first time I've felt grounded in a while." Rowan smiled, a gentle warmth in their expression. "I'm glad to hear that. And for what it's worth, I'm grateful you're here too. I think we both needed this." There was a long pause, and in that silence something unspoken hung between them. Jamie felt an impulse to reach out, to bridge the space that had once felt so vast but now seemed paper-thin. They hesitated, not wanting to break the delicate balance they'd found, but the feeling lingered, a quiet ache that settled deep within them. Days turned into weeks, and the attic became a sanctuary, a place where they both sought refuge from the weight of the world outside. The moments they shared grew in intensity, not from what they said, but from the closeness that had developed, the quiet bond that had formed in the space of dust and forgotten memories. One night, as they sat together on the floor, Rowan spoke, their voice barely a whisper. "You know, Jamie, I think your father would be proud of you, proud of the person you've become." Jamie felt a lump form in their throat, the words striking a deep chord. They looked at Rowan, seeing the sincerity in their gaze, and for the first time they allowed themselves to believe it. "Thank you," Jamie whispered, feeling the warmth of the words settle within them. Rowan reached out, their hand covering Jamie's in a gesture that felt both comforting and electrifying. Jamie's breath caught the sudden proximity, stirring an emotion they couldn't quite name. Their fingers entwined, a small, unplanned gesture, but one that felt like a lifeline, a connection that tethered them in the midst of their shared grief and healing. The silence grew heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken words and lingering glances. Jamie's heart raced, their pulse quickening as they met Rowan's gaze. In that moment, there was no distance between them, only the quiet intensity of understanding, of connection that transcended family ties or social expectations. Jamie's hand tightened slightly, their thumb brushing against Rowan's knuckles in a gesture that felt more intimate than any words they could muster. Rowan didn't pull away, their gaze unwavering as they held Jamie's hand, the soft warmth of their skin grounding Jamie in a way they hadn't anticipated. Neither of them spoke, but the air was thick with a tension that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. They sat there, hands entwined, the attic around them fading as they lost themselves in the silent language that had developed between them. It was a language built on shared memories, on whispered secrets and quiet moments of understanding, a bond that felt unbreakable, yet fragile in its newness. In the dim light, Jamie felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to close the distance between them, to break the fragile boundary that had formed in the space of their shared grief and connection. But they hesitated, fearing the consequences, fearing the line they both seemed so close to crossing. They lingered, the moment stretching, each second filled with the silent question neither dared to voice. And in that quiet space, Jamie realized just how much they had come to depend on Rowan, not just as a link to the past, but as a presence in their life, someone who understood the depth of their loss and the struggles they faced. The silence felt like it was pressing down on them, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Jamie could feel the warmth of Rowan's hand in theirs, grounding yet electrifying, and the soft rhythm of their breathing seemed to sync, creating an unspoken connection between them. It was as if the attic itself was holding its breath, waiting for what might come next. But just as the moment seemed poised to tip into something irreversible, Rowan gently withdrew their hand, the spell broken. They glanced away, their face softened by an unreadable expression, and the tension in the room dissipated into the quiet. Jamie felt a pang of longing mixed with relief, an odd combination that left them feeling unsteady. Rowan cleared their throat, offering a small, almost apologetic smile. "Maybe we should call it a night," Rowan said softly, voice wavering just slightly. Jamie nodded, struggling to find words, feeling the mix of emotions settle heavily in their chest. They each stood, brushing the dust from their clothes and heading down the narrow stairs, neither one looking back at the attic they'd transformed from a cluttered storage space into a sanctuary of shared memory and quiet understanding. That night, as Jamie lay in bed, their mind kept circling back to the moment they'd shared, the gentle way Rowan's hand had rested against theirs, the unspoken understanding between them that had felt so natural, so comforting. It was like an anchor in the swirling chaos of everything they'd been feeling. But it also brought a sense of confusion, a realization that their connection had grown into something deeper, more intense than they'd ever intended. They couldn't quite name the feeling. It was too complex, too layered with grief and gratitude and something else that lingered just beyond reach. The next day they both moved around each other in the house with a kind of polite caution, as if afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile understanding they'd built. Rowan offered Jamie coffee in the morning, their gaze meeting for just a brief moment before they both looked away, the weight of the previous night's encounter hovering between them like a secret. As the days continued, they found themselves returning to the attic, slipping back into the familiar rhythm of sorting, sifting, sharing quiet stories. It became a ritual, a space where they could step away from the complexities of the outside world and focus on something as simple as the comfort of each other's presence. The attic was no longer just a room full of forgotten belongings. It was a place of refuge, a place where Jamie felt they could be vulnerable, where they could allow themselves to feel things they'd kept buried for so long. One afternoon, as they were carefully sorting through a box of letters, Rowan glanced at Jamie with a hesitant smile. "There's something I've been wanting to show you," they said, their voice tinged with a mix of anticipation and vulnerability. Jamie looked up, curiosity piqued. "Oh, what is it?" Rowan reached behind a stack of old books and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. They opened it with a gentleness that suggested it held something deeply personal, and Jamie could see that the contents were precious, a collection of small, seemingly random items, a pressed flower, a weathered ticket stub, a tiny handwritten note. Rowan handed Jamie one of the items, a small silver locket. "This belonged to your father," Rowan said, their voice almost reverent. "He gave it to me on our anniversary. Inside there's a picture of you as a child." Jamie's breath caught as they held the locket, feeling the cool weight of the metal in their hand. They opened it carefully, their gaze falling on the tiny photo of themselves from years ago, their face frozen in a moment of innocence and unburdened joy. It was a version of themselves they barely remembered, but seeing it now, in this locket, brought a flood of memories rushing back. Rowan watched them, a softness in their expression. "He loved you so much, Jamie. He wanted you to have this someday. But I guess I just didn't know when the right time was. Until now." Jamie looked up, their eyes meeting Rowan's, and felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, a blend of grief, gratitude, and something even deeper. They placed the locket back in Rowan's hand, covering it with their own. "Thank you," Jamie whispered, their voice barely audible. "For everything." For a long moment they held each other's gaze, and in that silence something shifted. It was as if all the barriers they'd carefully maintained had dissolved, leaving only the raw truth of their connection. Jamie could feel it, a magnetic pull, an unspoken bond that had grown stronger with each shared memory, each quiet conversation, until it became undeniable. They both knew they were standing at a precipice, and in that moment Jamie realized they were no longer afraid of it. There was a profound intimacy in the air, a tension that felt as inevitable as it was terrifying. Jamie leaned forward slightly, their hands still resting over Rowan's, their eyes never leaving Rowan's gaze. Rowan's breath hitched, and for a moment it seemed as if they might pull away, but instead they held their ground, their expression softening, their eyes filled with something Jamie could only describe as longing. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was thick, almost tangible, and in that space Jamie felt as though they were seeing Rowan for the first time, not as an extension of their father's memory, but as someone who understood them deeply, who had become a source of comfort and understanding. Someone whose presence filled a void Jamie hadn't even realized was there. Their faces were mere inches apart, and Jamie could feel Rowan's breath, warm and steady. It was a moment suspended in time, a moment that felt both fleeting and endless, as though the universe had paused to watch them. Jamie's heart raced, every nerve alive with anticipation, with a feeling that transcended anything they'd ever felt. But just as they were about to close the distance, Rowan's phone buzzed in their pocket, shattering the silence. They pulled back, breaking the spell, and the tension in the room dissipated in an instant, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. Rowan glanced down at their phone, their expression unreadable as they quickly silenced it. I'm sorry," Rowan said, their voice tinged with regret. "I didn't mean for, They trailed off, the words hanging unfinished between them, as if acknowledging what they both knew but couldn't say. Jamie nodded, feeling the same sense of disappointment mixed with relief. They knew they'd come close to something they could never undo, and as much as it left them feeling unsettled, they couldn't deny the connection that had grown between them. It was real, raw, and something that had altered the fabric of their relationship in ways they hadn't anticipated. The following days were filled with an uneasy tension, both of them moving around each other with a careful distance, as if afraid to reignite the spark that had nearly led them over the edge. The attic project continued, but the air between them was filled with a quiet tension, a sense of unspoken feelings and lingering glances that left them both feeling off balance. One evening, as they were packing up for the night, Rowan spoke, their voice soft, almost hesitant. "Jamie, I think we need to talk." Jamie looked up, their heart racing, feeling both anticipation and dread. "Yeah," they replied, barely above a whisper. They both knew this conversation had been a long time coming, and as they settled down on the attic floor, facing each other, the weight of everything unsaid filled the space between them. Rowan took a deep breath, their expression vulnerable. "I don't know what's been happening between us, Jamie, but I do know that I care about you, more than I expected to, more than I think I should." Jamie felt a surge of emotion, the words striking a chord deep within them. "I feel the same way," they admitted, the confession slipping out before they could second-guess it. "I don't know when it happened, but being here with you, it's been the only thing that's made me feel whole again." Rowan's gaze softened, and for a moment they sat in silence, each struggling to process the depth of what they felt. It was a bond that defied simple explanations, a connection forged in the quiet moments of shared loss, a love that had grown from the raw, unfiltered truth of who they were. "I don't want to lose this," Jamie said softly, their voice filled with conviction. "Whatever this is, whatever it means, I don't want it to end." Rowan reached out, their hand finding Jamie's, fingers entwining in a gesture that spoke louder than words. They both knew that they were standing on the edge of something profound, something that had the power to change them both in ways they couldn't fully understand. And in that moment, with the weight of the past behind them and the uncertainty of the future ahead, they chose to embrace it, to allow themselves to feel, even if it was messy, even if it was messy, even if it was complicated. They leaned into each other, their foreheads touching, the quiet intimacy of the gesture grounding them in the midst of their swirling emotions. For a long moment they simply breathed, allowing the depth of their connection to settle, to take root in a place that felt as fragile as it was unbreakable. As Jamie and Rowan stayed in that quiet embrace, the air around them softened, the weight of all they had been through settling peacefully. They both knew that whatever had passed between them was a journey, one of shared loss, rediscovered bonds, and a deeper understanding of family and love. They hadn't anticipated finding such a connection within each other, but in that attic, surrounded by memories, they had found the courage to face their past, and in doing so, had created something new. As days turned into weeks, Jamie felt lighter, the burden they had carried beginning to lift. The bond with Rowan had given them a sense of belonging they hadn't realized they were missing, a reminder that family could be found in the most unexpected places. Rowan, too, seemed to find comfort in Jamie's presence, the quiet companionship helping them rediscover joy after the sorrow they had carried alone. Eventually, they finished organizing the attic, each item put away with care, but the space was no longer just a storage room. It had become a symbol of healing, of the journey they had taken together. On their last day there, they stood in the center of the attic, taking in the now organized space with a shared sense of accomplishment and peace. "Thank you for helping me," Rowan said, their voice thick with gratitude. "For helping me find my way back to this house, back to these memories. I don't think I could have done it alone." Jamie looked at Rowan, their eyes soft. "I think we helped each other. Being here, it's been exactly what I needed." They shared a long, understanding gaze, one that spoke of everything they had gone through together. Though their connection was profound, they both knew it would take on a new shape as they moved forward, grounded in respect, empathy, and the quiet love that had grown in the most unexpected way. When it was time for Jamie to leave, they embraced, the warmth of the hug a testament to the journey they had shared. It wasn't a goodbye, not really, just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. They both knew that their bond, though changed, would endure. It would be a reminder that sometimes the people we need most come into our lives in the most unexpected ways, and the love we build together has the power to heal old wounds. As Jamie drove away from the house, they glanced back in the rearview mirror, seeing Rowan standing on the porch, waving. They felt a sense of peace settle over them, a feeling of hope that lingered, knowing they had found a new sense of family, and that the connection they shared would stay with them, a quiet strength to carry forward. And as Rowan watched Jamie disappear down the road, they felt the same. The house felt different now, not a place of memories to hide away in the attic, but a home, filled with new meaning, love, and the promise of tomorrow.